for your group today. Um, Adolescent behavior is a big issue because that's where a lot of the problems start, and then they don't get dealt with on time. And then things escalate, and it usually ends up with the dog being shot ultimately. So I'm going to give you a little presentation, uh, a little slideshow presentation of who I am and some things. So my name is Louise Liebenberg. I was born and raised in South Africa. That is why I speak with quite a heavy accent. I lived in Europe and shepherded in Europe for 18 years. I actually started in sheep in South Africa already. I lived and worked in Europe. We ran a big shepherding company there. We started a school to train shepherds. We had a lot of problems with pet dogs killing sheep. So that is how I actually got into livestock guardian dogs in, what would it be, 1990, somewhere back then. So I've been in the world of livestock guardian dogs fairly long. I have two big passions in my life, and that is my ranch is the one, and wildlife is my other. So I've always felt that there must be a way to sort of coexist with wildlife and, how to better manage those kind of conflicts. So I've been on various boards. I've done a lot of work on some conflict management between wildlife and ranching because I always hope that there are better solutions. And of course, livestock guardian dogs is one of them. I was also very involved, especially in South Africa and Europe, with stock dogs, border collies, working them. I used to do sheepdog trials, and back in my trialing day, I was quite successful and did a lot there. So I've always been involved in a variety of sheepdogs. I'm just going to say, when I talk about terminology, sometimes I'll talk about a coyote, but it could be a wolf, it could be a bear. So it's just, it's not specific usually when I talk about predators. I don't often use the word predators, but I might say, if the coyote comes visiting. If I talk about sheep, it's not that I'm excluding goats or other livestock. It's just sort of the language I speak because it's the livestock I have. So I live in the northern Alberta. We are in a subarctic climate. We're right in the middle of the boreal forest, so we have all the big predators. We have wolves that den right on our farm. We deal with lots of coyotes. We have cougars. So we have bears. We have the whole range of predators here. We have a very short growing season, so we usually only have like a grazing season from mid-May to mid-September, and then it starts freezing again. Our temperatures can range from -40 to about 86 Fahrenheit in the summer. Our livestock operation is really limited because the little short growing season we have also has to provide enough winter feed for 8 months of the year for our livestock. So we have a fair number of acres, but not a lot of livestock relative to those acres. My operations, we run primarily Dorset, Suffolk ewes. I'm downsizing a little bit because we are in a major drought here, and our numbers it's just getting really hard to find feed for them. We have a purebred and a commercial Angus operation. So that is our main activity on the farm. We have horses and we have the livestock guardian dogs. So, I've been involved with livestock ranching since the early 90s, initially with a lot of sheep, and now it's kind of switching over into more cattle. Just by the way, if somebody has a question, you're welcome to use the chat and get Bill to type up a chat or a question, but we will cover questions a little bit at the end, just so that we can see actually where the issues are that need to be addressed. I will give my presentation, and then, we can have a bit of a discussion afterwards. And Bill, you just need to keep me a little on track and time-wise, just to make sure that I don't go over my time, because actually every topic I have is almost a full day seminar if needed. So I have to really tone it down a little bit and speed through it. So I'm just going to show you some slides from my ranch. The wolf pups there were born in the middle of our ranch a couple of years back. There were 7 of them right next to our calving cows and our grazing sheep. So we've had a lot of experience of how to manage and deal with them. Coyotes, of course, is an issue everywhere in the North American continent. Our coyotes are maybe not quite as brave as some other people's coyotes. I think it's because they get a lot of pressure from the wolves in our area. I know coyotes in eastern Canada are a lot bolder, a lot stronger, a little bit bigger as well. So our coyotes are pretty mild in comparison to some other coyotes in certain areas. We're always dealing with bears. Bears are a fun activity. We grow some crops to feed the livestock, and here's a bear sitting in a swathed oat field, just getting fat before the winter. We have a lot of ungulates. Actually, one of our biggest problems currently on the farm is elk predation on our hay. At the moment, the elk are costing us between $30,000 to $40,000 a year, just in the damage they're doing to our hay bales and our fencing, things like that. But that's not an elk, that's a moose, just for the picture clarity there. Hawks, eagles, ravens. The ravens are a big issue here. So let's just dive straight into some issues with livestock guardian dogs. The reason why I got into livestock guardian dogs is that I felt that a lot of people were, especially Western people, were a little confused about, how to raise these dogs properly. There's a lot of misleading information, a lot of pet dog ideas, perpetrated in the livestock guardian dog world. And that is a bit of a problem because too many people who start in livestock guardian dogs get very confused. What is the right thing to do? And then problems seem to creep in, and there's not a lot of people guiding them. Oftentimes the breeders are actually not livestock owners. And so you're having, a lot of showbred dogs or dogs that haven't seen a sheep in generations getting sold as livestock guardian dogs, and the breeders are not being able to offer support or help for the inexperienced owner. So, programs like your Texas Livestock Guardian Dog Association and a few more associations are absolutely crucial, really, to provide some extension, to provide some help in how to work with these dogs. I think there are also a lot of myths. Now, I've lived in Europe. I've seen a lot of these dogs, these breeds in their original countries. I've traveled extensively over Europe. And there's a lot of misconceptions. People have this idea that the shepherds and the dogs live in a house together and, things like that. It's really not the case. How we expect our livestock guardian dogs to work here in North America is not how they are worked in Europe. We do not generally shepherd our sheep unless you're a Basque shepherd on the range, but the majority of mid-size sheep operations, generally in North America, we turn our dog out with a stock, it stays out there, and we check on the stock maybe once, twice a day, maybe once or twice every few days. In these countries where the livestock guardian dogs originated, the shepherds are standing shepherding their sheep. They're standing looking at the sheep pretty much all day. Those dogs are rarely left unsupervised. And when the shepherds go to bed or go to town or, come off the mountains and that, the dogs are chained up. They're locked up, chained up. They're not free ranging with the sheep. So we have a different way of working with our dogs. So we have to find a way to work with the dogs that's sort of a blended situation from how they were originally bred and for the role that they were originally bred to do to what we actually need them to be here in North America to be successful. So that is something we have to bear in mind. So when I give a presentation, I generally don't read everything I write on the screen, or I might not even talk about it because I all know you guys can read faster than what I can talk. So, it's for you to read what's on the screen, and I'll just keep talking through it. So there are various puppy development stages, and I believe Bill did a seminar some months back on, these different stages. So I'm just going to briefly mention them and why it's important. I'm also going to touch briefly on bonding, because bonding is so important to the future development of the dog. It doesn't mean to say that you're not going to have problems if you have a well-bonded dog, but you definitely have laid a foundation for the dog to be as successful as it possibly can. So on this puppy development stage, problems start creeping in at that testing period, that between the 3 to 6 months, generally not 3, closer to that 5, 6 months of age. And that's where little issues start creeping in. Up until that stage, the puppy is usually as good as gold, and people who buy a puppy, oh, they're posting all over Facebook and social media, like, what a fantastic puppy. And, it's been no problem whatsoever. And then from one day to the next, the puppy is 5 months old, and they come and they've noticed that the puppy has started chewing lamb's ears or pulling some wool or chasing the sheep around or, doing something that's naughty. And people are flabbergasted that that actually happened. And, that they went from being an angel to now being a menace to the sheep. So we are going to look at some of those issues as they start arising and what we can do to sort of manage that a little bit. So adolescence usually lasts from, I usually think around about 8 months to that maturity, 24 months. But there are some breeds that are slower maturing, so it could actually extend into your 28 months. Some start younger, but that's generally the age where a lot of supervision is required, because that is where you're going to start seeing adolescent problems. Your bonding stage is generally regarded in the pet world. It is usually, up to about that 12 weeks of age, 7 to 12 weeks. That's usually when a pet dog will go to its new family. It'll bond with a new family. Everything is great and dandy. In the livestock guardian dogs, we generally feel that it extends to about that 16 weeks of age before the pup actually gets into that pre-adolescent and carrying on from there. And that bonding stage is really very important. It's the time when that puppy is going to start understanding the language of the sheep. Now, we all know with human children, you can teach them a new language when they're kids way easier than it is for us older people to learn a new language. The puppy is going to learn to sort of get cues from the sheep. What makes them upset? What do they react to? How do they react? What is a warning sign? Like, dog language and sheep language is very different. Where a sheep might headbutt another sheep away from the feed trough, dogs generally don't headbutt, right? They use their teeth, they use body language, they use posture. So puppies have to learn this new language. And that new language is best learned between that very young age to about 16 weeks. After 16 weeks, it's not impossible to bond a dog to sheep after that, but it's just a whole lot harder and it takes a whole lot longer. The next thing I want to talk about in that bonding stage, and I think a lot of people also do not realize how important or what effect primary and secondary bonding is. So primary bond is generally a bond between the mother and the child, of the same species. That is the first bond that forms when those pups are born. The first thing it's going to bond to is its mom, right? That is just how it goes. Secondary bonds are usually to other dogs, other animals, things like that. People, that would be a secondary bond. Primary bonds happen naturally, easily, organically. It just sort of goes. Secondary bonds, you need to intervene a little bit. So if you want a house pet to be really good in the house, you wanted to socialize with your cats and with the kids and, the neighbors' kids and things like that, that is going to be a secondary bond. Cross-species bonding is a whole lot harder. So when you want one animal to bond to another animal, that is a lot harder to take place. Now, there's different ways of doing it. You can get like baby goslings to attach to a human through imprinting. But when we want a predator, the dog, to bond with its prey, a sheep, you really have very high expectations for the dog to be successful in that. All right. So it's a very hard bond to create. So we have to do everything in our power to facilitate that type of bonding. So we really do need those pups in with sheep. We need them to think that sheep belong in their world, that sheep are just around them, always around them, to create that bond, because it is a difficult bond to create. People to puppies is a whole lot easier because we provide in all their needs. We feed them, we pay attention, we interact with them. So creating a dog-human bond is very simple, but to get that dog to bond to its livestock requires a lot more effort, time, and facilitation. We have to organize it so it works. There's also a little bit of an issue that a lot of people misunderstand what is the difference between bonding and trustworthiness. You can have your American Pit Bull Terrier be very trustworthy with your livestock, but it won't be bonded to the livestock. Trustworthiness, a bonded dog, you want them to be trustworthy, but trustworthy on its own does not make it a livestock guardian dog. And if you're not understanding what I'm meaning by that, feel free to jump in and, throw a question out. But trustworthiness is a dog that just will be around. Like most general farm dogs are generally good. They won't, kill the sheep and that. It's trustworthy, but it will not feel the need, if wolves come calling, to stand up and actually protect the animals. And that is the difference. And you see that a lot on all these social media sites. Oh, I bought a poodle and it's just fantastic with the sheep and it's guarding the sheep. Yeah, it might bark when something comes closer, but is it really going to protect those animals? And does it have the ability to protect those animals? And that is the difference between a livestock guardian dog and other breeds, but it's also the difference between what is trustworthy and bonded. So we have to sort of differentiate those concepts a little bit. Having a puppy that is bonded to the sheep does not mean that it will not go through a naughty adolescent stage. It means that you've laid a foundation. The puppy's still going to develop like puppies develop, and they are going to go through that adolescent stage. So, the one doesn't mean that if you do it right at the bonding stage, doesn't mean to say that you're going to have an angel when it's 10 months old. That those two are not linked together. So livestock guardian dog generally has just two jobs. It's got to protect from the predators, protect the livestock from predators, and it mustn't kill the livestock. So that is its only two jobs that it needs to do. And of those two, protecting from the predators is actually the most important job. That's why we get them. We want them to protect those sheep from coyotes, bears, wolves, whatever. In that, we don't want them to become the predator themselves and kill the livestock, right? But a lot of people seem to think that the do not kill the livestock or being trustworthy is kind of the only part of being a livestock guardian dog. All they aim for is that super trustworthy dog, which is great, but that super trustworthy dog that won't protect the livestock from predators means your livestock guardian dog is actually not functioning as it should be. So it's a balance of those two things. The dog has got to be good around the sheep, but its primary job is to become protective of the livestock, not necessarily of the territory. You want, certainly on big range operations, you want that dog to go where the sheep are. It's no use if the dog is laying on the porch and the sheep are 2 miles from home getting eaten by wolves, then your dog is not doing its job. It might be super trustworthy, but it's not doing its job at that moment. So, we have to remember that the primary job is that the dog has to kill or chase off predators. Its primary job is not to lick off newborn lambs. Its primary job is not to snuggle up to baby goats and things like that. Its primary job is to protect from predators. That's why we have them. It is, of course, cute if they do snuggle up to the goats, but that is less important than just being trustworthy and protective. So a lot of adolescent behavior starts off as play behavior. So young dogs, young pups will always play. They play with their siblings, they play with their mother, they play with other adults. And as a puppy, playing has a really important function of teaching certain concepts, such as fair play. So if one pup is always playing in a mean way, other puppies will stop responding to it. They learn bite inhibition, like how hard can they bite, without the other puppies not wanting to respond to them. Play behavior is sort of the start of learning about, how to interact. The problem with play behavior is that if you don't manage it, or if the dog doesn't self-manage a little bit, that will lead into other problems. So as the shepherd or the owner, there's some things that we do want to ensure, like if you are raising siblings together, some of them will play all the time and not actually pay attention to the livestock. They become so focused on each other. That is that primary bond. They same species, family members, that's your primary bond. That becomes more important to them, overridingly more important than anything else. I generally do not like raising siblings together just because I want them to mature quicker. I want them to have a certain calmness about them, and I want them to be bonded to the sheep first. Sometimes I do raise siblings together, it just depends a lot on the dogs, but those are sort of concepts that are involved there. Play behavior is hunting behavior. That is where all predators learn how to hunt. Playing is a precursor to hunting. There is, and of course, all dogs are predators. With our livestock guardian dogs, we like to breed for a low prey drive, a low sort of triggering behavior, just so that it's easier for them to live with the sheep. So when you look at hunting sequences, you have that like orient, like find your prey, eye, stalk, chase, grab, and then carries on to like the kill, dissect, consume. If you look at herding dogs, we use play behavior, natural play behavior, that's the instinct. We use that and modify it. We put obedience to it so we can do our sheep work with them, right? So if you look at the blue herding dog list there, it is everything that we need from a herding dog, right? Our guardian dogs, we kind of want them at the, like, you can orient, like know where they are, but you kind of want to stop at that. You don't want them to be triggered by rapid movement, where with a border collie or a healer, you kind of do want that. So it's completely different behaviors and where you go. So this hunting behavior cycle is actually what we have to look for in adolescent dogs. If they start displaying some of these behaviors, you know in your mind they are moving in a more hunting focused behavior pattern, where if they're not showing that, so they're not stalking the sheep and chasing them around and that, then their mind is still not going in that direction. And this is really important, that we start looking for signs of where dog is sort of honing its predatory instincts over and above its like stay calm, leave them be kind of behavior. So as I discussed this a little bit, excessive play behavior. So I'm not talking about like two pups just having a little fun game together, but some dogs play all the time. That excessive play results in a very juvenile mindset in the dog. So dogs who play excessively will be slower maturing. They'll be harder to bond to your livestock. They'll become hyper bonded to each other. They will translate that behavior to the livestock. And often that play behavior together with its sibling will go over that together. They will start playing with the livestock. And that's where all the issues of chasing and nipping and wool pulling and, all those kind of behavior problems start. So really, you've got to think of it as excessive play behavior slows down how the dog is going to develop, keeps the dog in a very juvenile mindset, and it's something we actually want to move them out of. I like my dogs when they're about a year old to be pretty mature in their behavior, pretty mature in how they respond and react. It doesn't mean to say that they're never allowed to play. That is not what I'm saying. But it is a sort of a control on that. So if a dog is playing excessively, maybe put it in with another adult that is calmer, that is not so playful. If the dog is easily triggered into playing, then maybe having it around playful baby goats is just the wrong phase at that moment. I like to put my naughty adolescent playful dogs maybe in with my mature bulls or big rams, something that's maybe not going to play with them, not going to trigger them to play, just to help keep that calm mindset in the dog. Because once you start getting that predatory playing kind of behavior going in their mind, it's something they keep doing, which leads into that keep doing is a self-rewarding behavior. So playing is self-rewarding. I play with the sheep. It's fun. I like to keep doing it. People who smoke, it's a self-rewarding behavior. Every time they smoke, they have fun. It feels good. They keep doing it. So it's a self-perpetuating behavior. It is hard to stop. It becomes a pattern and it generally escalates. So when we're looking at livestock guardian dogs, when we talk about self-rewarding behaviors, chasing livestock is so much fun, right? So once a pup starts chasing, it's hard to stop them because they're rewarding themselves because it's fun to do. A dog that, for example, accidentally maybe kills a lamb and starts eating it, the eating becomes the reward. So he puts that together in his brain and he thinks like, hey, I'm chasing it, it dies, and I eat it, and therefore, oh, this is fun. And that's when you start really getting into the bigger problems. Wool pulling, pulling tails, those kind of behaviors are all self-rewarding. Any hunting behavior, any play behavior is self-rewarding. And we all know it's very hard to give up smoking. They're very hard behaviors to stop. So to take the reward away from bad behavior, you have to be quite extreme in how you discourage it, because when you're not around, the dog's just going to go back and do the same problems because he's being rewarded. So that is something that we will actually loop back to a little bit later, because it's just going to tie all these concepts a little bit together. Escalation is when the dog starts today and he's sort of following a lamb around, and that lamb runs off and he starts chasing it. And then tomorrow he's chased it into a corner, and the next day he's pulling wool from it. The day after that, he's standing over the lamb, biting the ears. And what happens with sheep, if you've never seen it before, they become almost paralyzed. They just stand there and the dog is just eating on them and chewing on them and pulling wool and things like that. And the sheep doesn't respond. And then after that, the dog is going to single out one lamb and keep doing that same behavior to that lamb. And eventually that lamb will go down and the dog will kill it. And then the next day it'll start eating it. So there's a real escalation of behavior. And it is absolutely crucial that as the owner of the dog, you've got to manage it. You have to stop that behavior at the first little bit of playing. Because once he gets to that eating phase, he's probably been doing it for 3, 4, 5 days already. And you're going to be really late in responding. It's going to be really difficult to change what the dog is doing. So watching for those early signs of issues is absolutely the time to correct any mistakes that the dog's made, because the dog is still young enough to be impressionable. So if you toss a bucket at him and yell and scream and pretend that it's the end of the world, then he might realize that that self-reward he was having is overridden by your correction as such. So those are really important concepts to bear in mind. So I always say a adolescent dog doesn't go from 0 to killing sheep in one moment. It's very rare that that escalation goes that fast. but the escalation can go that fast in 2-3 days. So you have to be really careful and pay attention. And I like to call these warning signs. You need to, when you check your sheep, you need to start watching for warning signs. Are the sheep telling you that the dog is, or the pup is doing naughty things when you're not around? Are the sheep bunched up in a corner? Are they panting when you come? Are they stressed at the sheep? Are they constantly like on high alert, paying attention to the sheep, to the dog? Because the sheep will tell you when your dog is not doing the right thing. But you also have to watch it, pup. Does he now and then, like just like a border collie eyes the sheep? Is he eyeing them? Is he stalking them? Is he getting excited and chasing them? How about nipping? Maybe he's carrying newborn lambs around. Is he pulling wool? Play bowing is like an invitation to play when they're walking around and there's like a young sheep and the dog goes down and it's like, hey, come and play with me. Is your dog resource guarding? Is it excessive? Is it within normal boundaries? Maybe he is killing newborn lambs, pawing livestock, cornering them, herding behavior. Guardian dogs can follow the sheep. Sheep can follow the dogs, but the guardian dog should not be pushing sheep in specific directions. And if you come to the field and your sheep are all bunched up in the corner, your livestock guardian dog is showing herding behavior. And we remember the other slide, herding behavior is the first parts of the hunting sequence. So you really want to sort of put a stop to that. The dog is supposed to follow the sheep, be with the sheep, but he's not supposed to direct them. They need to be able to graze where they need to graze, and it's not for the dog to direct them. Now, our sheep like to follow our guardian dog. So if I'm putting them into a new grazing area and it's heavy bush and they know that the wolves are in there, the sheep won't go in there without the dogs going in first. So they tend to see the dog as something to follow, to be guided by. But it's not that the dogs are pushing the sheep into the bush. That is for the border collies to do. Sometimes guardian dogs will like keep sheep away from a hay feeder or a water trough or a bone that they buried. Other warning signs are like growling at the livestock, standing over them. So there are lots of signs: mounting the livestock, ganging up on them, separating lambs from ewes, where the dog looks like he's guarding the lamb or protecting the lamb from the ewe. Hiding lambs. Some guardian dogs will go and hide them in some brush or things like that. So, those are signs that you need to pay attention to. And if you suspect that the dog is doing something like that, you need to act on it that moment. Too often, people will come to a field and they'll see that sheep, for example, on the slide with the wool pulled out of it. The sheep is still alive, by the way, but with the wool pulled out of it. And they'll see the dog just laying next to the sheep. And the first thing they think is, oh, maybe coyotes came in and caught the sheep and the dog is protecting the sheep. I believe you've actually got to think the other way. The first sign of anything going wrong is maybe suspect the dog first. Because if you don't, and you allow the dog, you give him the benefit of the doubt, he might escalate his behavior to a point that you cannot turn it around anymore. So it will do the dog no harm to maybe monitor him a bit more, or maybe lock him up, or maybe put a camera on him, or, just to watch what he's doing rather than allowing him to keep doing bad behavior. So always suspect the predator that lives with the sheep first before you suspect like coyotes or wolves or whatever from killing your livestock. So I've got some slides here of some different dogs doing some different behavior, and I just want to point some little details out here. So this big white dog, I know this dog personally, and this dog did go on to killing livestock. And the owner took some photos of this dog, and I'm so appreciative of her. And she allows me to share these photos just to show people on some behavior issues. So if you look at these sheep, all the ears are pointing back, their heads are pretty high, they're looking a little bit stressed. This dog looks like he's following them around, moving them around. His tail is up. He's a little bit too interested in the livestock. So this this is a warning sign. If this was my dog, I would get in there, tell him to back off, leave them alone, and I would watch him a little bit more. He might get, just a bit of a correction for that, so that he is aware that I am aware of his behavior. He now knows that I'm seeing what he's doing and I don't like what he's doing, and he needs to quit what he is doing. So that's just the first thing. And it just can be a verbal correction. It can just be like, hey, stop, back off, something like that, just to break that attention there. It's really cute. It's really sweet, but it's not behavior you actually want to see on the dog. Pawing the livestock is the start of controlling behavior. It's the start of claiming behavior. It's the start of dominance. The dog will hold that goat in. If the goat wants to go and do goat things, the dog might decide, well, no, I need you to stand right where you are. And if the goat goes away, he might grab it with its mouth. And then the goat could get injured. And then the goat will start bleeding and yelling and screaming, and the dog will get excited by that. And he might start like nipping at it more. So you get a escalation again in that. So if I see my dog doing that, I'd probably toss a bucket or a lead or something at him, tell him to stop, and then carry on from there, see what he's doing following that. But you don't want to see this. It's not cute. It's not good behavior. I always see it a little bit as working with horses or big bulls or rams. The dog shouldn't touch the sheep. The sheep shouldn't touch the dog. They need to respect each other's sort of personal boundaries. And that's when you can keep things going good. As soon as the dog is like touching the sheep in any like physical way, that's when problems could start. So it's okay that they gently sniff a nose, things like that, but the dog shouldn't really be doing much more than that. So here's that same dog that we saw earlier. You can see how this dog is hyper-focused on that lamb. He is staring at that lamb, and you can almost feel the tension between them. If that kid lets that lamb go, I can bet my ranch on it, that dog will run after that lamb because he's excited by it. He's a little triggered by that movement. He's too intense. He's too focused. He's got a hard staring kind of attitude to that lamb. So that is also a moment like you want to stop that kind of interaction early on. We discussed this slide earlier with the dog moving its head up, tail up, things like that. Sheep are stressed. The sheep are telling you, we're not happy, we're not comfortable with this dog. You can see the sheep here are showing high elevated awareness to this dog. You can see the ewe on the right-hand side. She's really staring this dog down. You can see the dog is staring at the sheep. He's really intense in his focus of the sheep. The sheep are sort of debating, do we fight the dog or do we run away from it? And if the sheep would run, then the dog's going to sort of chase them and it's going to escalate from there. If the sheep fight with the dog, he's probably going to protect himself and bite the sheep. So you're in a bad situation either way. So that sort of behavior needs to stop. Well, you can see this one speaks for itself. This dog is a young dog. I know this dog as well. It actually is in Europe. It's excited. It's not necessarily harming the sheep, but it's playing. And as I said earlier, play behavior leads to predatory behavior. So the sheep are not happy. They're not going to graze and gain pounds. The dog is getting too excited. This needs to stop. And that's what happens. So that eventually one sheep gets left behind and the dog's going to split it off. And this is the start of that predatory behavior. Now the dog is going to get super excited about what the sheep is doing, and he's going to try and engage the sheep in some way, and that could escalate to him really doing physical harm to the sheep. That is the play bowing that I spoke about. So this dog is inviting the sheep to play. But if you look at all these sheep in the front, their attitudes are absolutely not that we want to play. Sheep and dogs don't play in the same way. The sheep facing up to the dog is the same sheep that the dog had just split off. The sheep knows that this dog is going to be unreliable. The sheep knows that it's in trouble, right, with this dog. So those are kind of behaviors you need to pay attention to, and the dog will not show it to you every time, might not even show it when you're around, but you need to look at your sheep, how they react when the dog comes close, because the sheep will tell you the story. Here's the same white dog doing its intense staring next to that big gray dog. The sheep are not concerned about the adult gray dog. They're concerned about this young white dog. And that is often, I really trust how the sheep behave and what the sheep tell me. If I come to the field and I see the sheep are perfectly comfortable with the dog, I'm usually okay to know that the dog is doing the right thing. But if I come to the field and I feel the sheep are a little tense, always watching where the dog is, things like that, maybe those sheep are telling you, like, this dog is not reliable. We do not trust him. Something needs to happen. And that is where you have to step in. It is extremely rare that an older dog, especially like a family member, will correct a younger dog. That big gray dog on the left there is not going to correct that young dog. That is your job as the owner, the shepherd, the manager, whatever. That is your job to do. So let's just look at some broad general adolescent issues. I can't go into every single issue, so I'll just run through some of them, talk briefly about them. So roaming and fence crawling, leaving the livestock, that is often a problem based in either not bonded or getting too much fun activities, self-rewarding behaviors away from the sheep. So if the kids are playing ball with the dog in the backyard, that is self-rewarding, that's fun. The dog is going to choose that over staying with a bunch of boring sheep in the middle of a field. There are multiple ways to look at it. The other reason for why a lot of dogs roam is if you have larger numbers of dogs, there could be a lot of impact stress, fighting amongst the dogs, and some dogs eventually just decide, there's too much drama going on here, I need to go away, and they leave the sheep. So you have to really look at what is the cause of the problem. If it's bonding, you need to go back to that bonding stage. If it's that the kids are playing with the dog or it's getting fed away from the sheep, then that needs to stop. You need to get the dog back to where it is. The biggest thing with fence problems is you need to teach it to your young pup before it becomes a bigger problem. You need to teach them to respect fences, respect electric fencing, and when they come out on their own, it's got to be a not fun experience. When my dogs get out of the field as a young dog, I chase them back to the sheep and I will huck a piece of mud at them and I will yell at them. And the entire time that they are away from the sheep, I make sure it's not a pleasant time. The minute they get back into the field with the sheep, then it's a good time. So that's, some of the ways you can deal with fence issues. Resource guarding is like a double-edged sword. There's been some research that has shown that dogs who have a very high resource guarding tendency tend to be very protective of the sheep. But you've got to manage that as well, because resource guarding can get ridiculous. Like some dogs will chase the sheep away from a hay feeder for hundreds of yards. That is getting ridiculous. Certain things they can resource guard, like their own food. My sheep will eat all my dog food if I don't allow them to resource guard, but they're not allowed to protect like a water trough from the sheep. They're not allowed to claim lambs because that is a resource guarding tendency. They're not allowed to like take the lamb away from the ewe. They're not allowed to eat a dead sheep out in the field, things like that. So resource guarding can show in multiple ways, but it's a general term of where a dog is claiming something, a space, area, toy, whatever, and making sure that other animals, people, whatever, can't come near it. Seasonal issues, you sometimes see dogs, especially adolescent dogs, get into trouble when it's the livestock's breeding season. So the whole year they're good, you've got them out with the ewes, it's great, you put in your rams for breeding, and suddenly the dog has an issue. And it's often because the rams are new to the dog, so it's new livestock coming in. The dogs can smell cycling. They smell the testosterone in the male animals, the estrus of the ewe, and that can change how a dog behaves or responds. So usually, like when we put in rams or if we bring in new sheep, change of weather when we come from cold weather into warm weather, you often see some changes at that time of the year and some problems usually starting then. Dominance is, of course, like when the dog is like bullying the sheep, he's rude to them, he's like he's not aware of his response to the sheep and how they react to that. Siblings is a real interesting debate. Some people swear by them, some people say it's a no-go. It really is very much personality dependent. I would say the majority of people who start with livestock guardian dogs should not start with siblings, because there's some issues you just are really hard to manage. If the two of them are chasing livestock together, they will do damage so fast because two bigger dogs. It's hard to manage. There are advantages to it, but I think for most people who are inexperienced in raising livestock guardian dogs, they probably should not start with siblings. There are good points to raising siblings. If they are very playful, they will tend to play with each other first. But even that, it's got to be super monitored that the playing doesn't go from the pups to the livestock. Raising siblings, if you run very big operations, you have a lot of land to manage, you can split siblings so that they're working in different groups. So, you know, it's not a hard no, but it's also not a hard yes. It really depends on the situation. Managing problems like aggression toward livestock. So a lot of people say, you know, well, my pup is pulling wool, I need to shoot the dog because, you know, it cannot be turned around. And I always say, it can be turned around up to a certain point, right? Some dogs are just not going to make livestock guardian dogs. They have too high a prey drive. They do not have the right instincts, things like that. That dog is never going to work out. But if you're in that adolescent stage of the dog, you do need to work with them. That is the time where you have to shine, put in the time, put in the effort to prevent escalation. And often those dogs, they could be naughty during that adolescent time, but you can turn them around. I had a dog for years that the first year, I think I could have killed him 10 times because he would drive me nuts. But after that first year, he became my best, most solid, most reliable. He was actually my best livestock guardian dog that I've had for many years. And I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I did work with him. I did try and figure out what his issues were. And once we got that all figured out, it was great. And actually what his issue turned out to be is he didn't like sheep close to him. He was hyper bonded to them. He would be anywhere where they're grazing on thousands of acres. He was always close to them, but he didn't like it if a sheep came and lay down next to him. And he eventually just learned to remove himself, to get up and go and lay somewhere else or lay on a higher platform where a sheep couldn't get. But he didn't like sheep really close to him. And so he would growl at them, he would like snap at them, things like that. But it was just to tell the sheep, back off, I need space here. And sheep don't respect that, of course. So that's where some issues started. And the last thing is fighting, in-pack fighting, things like that. That is a whole nother presentation. So often when you understand the motivation behind the behavior, as I said, like stealing lambs is a resource guarding problem. So it's easy to find a solution if you understand what is the motivation for the behavior. Is it a lack of bonding? Well, then you need to go back to that bonding stage. If it's aggression to the sheep, well, what is causing that aggression? So, understanding what the behavior is telling you will tell you what the solution is. So some problem-solving things. I swear by some yokes, because if a dog is crawling under fences just because it wants to go and have fun elsewhere, then a yoke is a good solution. I like to change things. When my adolescent dogs are growing, I feel we need to challenge them. What we tend to do with adolescent dogs is we tend to put them on like a teenage lockdown. And I believe that is not the right approach. I like to challenge adolescent dogs. They're usually getting into trouble because they want more to do. So what I do usually is when my adolescent dogs are growing, they'll go from the bonding pens into like a smaller field. But if they're getting a little naughtier, I might put them out with the big dogs in an area where I know there are lots of predators, and the dog will be challenged to work. He will focus his work more on the new smells, on, the environment, the terrain, things like that. If that's not possible, because, for example, in the winter when we're not grazing, I will change where he is. So I'll change the environment, or I'll change the livestock he is with. So I will put them with the bulls or with the horses, or with the rams. I will move that young dog around and try and challenging him to be physically more active, so in a bigger area, and mentally in the work that he's doing. So he might have to deal with a little more predation, or with other dogs, put him in a bigger group of dogs that'll sort of dominate. So, finding, like, changing things up, I find is a real solution to a lot of problems. So I'm not going to go through everything on this slide. You can read it, but instinct alone is not the solution. If you look at herding dogs, they can have an instinct to herd, but if you're not going to guide it, train it, and put some command onto it, they're not really very useful. And it's with the guardian dogs, you're not really training them as such, but you're guiding their behavior. So as soon as they go off track in their behavior, you have to bring it back. And you bring it back through supervision. Sometimes you have to facilitate things. I had a dog many years ago, and she was naughty as could be, but I couldn't see her out in the field. So eventually I had to put up some electric nets, put some sheep in there where I could watch her from the house, and I could spy on the dog and see what she's doing and figure out what is triggering the dog, what is causing the problem. So sometimes you have to go out of your way to find a way to solve the problem. Corrections. Some dogs need corrections, and I always say the punishment should fit the crime. So if the dog is just staring at the sheep, then maybe like a hey, stop is enough. If the dog is pulling wool, it might need a bigger correction. He's got to learn that that behavior is unacceptable. So, we also have to look at sometimes what are good signs, because adolescents, just like human adolescents, they'll show you glimpses of good things. And, you've got to hold out hope when things look really bleak that they are going to turn things around. So, for example, the dog on the left with that lamb, the dog shouldn't be touching that lamb. He's going to be licking at that navel. He'll eventually chew on it. He'll pull that navel out. The lamb's going to have a big wound there. Lamb's going to die. It's just a bad situation. Where the dog on the other side, she is respectful of that ewe. She's laying close by so she can sort of keep an eye on things, but she's not interfering in that birth process. To me, that is ideal behavior. So you've got to look for what is the good, correct the wrong. So here are some good signs that we like to look at the sheep. So I like a dog to have a soft approach to the sheep. If you look at the dog in that slide, the tail is fairly low, the dog's head is low, the ram lamb is saying, like, back off, I don't like you here. But the dog is being soft in its approach. The dog needs to move out of the way of the sheep. It's not the sheep who needs to get out of the way of the dog. The dog needs to move out of the way of the sheep. The dog needs to give the sheep space. They need to not interfere in birthing processes or things like that. If a goat gets stuck with its head in a fence and is getting all excited, the dog shouldn't be going pulling on that goat, because that's just wrong. It needs to maybe lay in the area or pay attention or whatever. They should not touch the sheep. So those are some of the good signs that you're looking for in the young dog. We discussed like failure a little bit earlier, so too much prey drive. When you allow things to escalate too long, so today playing, in 3 days' time, it could be like serious injury to the sheep. So do not allow it escalation. A lot of people start in livestock guardian dogs, but it's not necessarily a solution for everyone. And I think that is also where a lot of problems creep in, that people maybe don't have the time commitment to work with a dog, especially an adolescent dog. Or it requires a change of management. If you're having issues with your dog and you can't change how you're managing either the issue or your livestock or whatever's come up, that could be a challenge in itself. There's also an adjustment period for livestock. If they've never had livestock guardian dogs before, they could be hyper aggressive to the dog, which creates problems because the dog will feel it needs to defend itself. It might snap at the sheep and you'll get escalation. Barking can be a big problem if you have neighbors close by. You've got to understand, I think the numbers in Europe were about, no matter how well bred the dog is, no matter how well raised it is, there's still about 17% of all dogs that are going to fail. So, you've got to bear in mind that some dogs will just not work out as a livestock guardian dog. Some dogs will partially work out. So if you have a dog, let's say you only run 20 ewes, that dog is only going to experience 20 births a year. It might never be super reliable around newborn lambs to the range dog that's having 5,000 births in a year. So, there's some differences there. Some people can manage the dog. It would be really good if the lambs are 2-3 weeks old. They just manage by lambing indoors or whatever. So there's issues there. It's expensive to keep dogs, and a lot of people don't realize it, and then they're buying a dog for their one Nubian goat and 3 chickens and the hamster, and then the dog is killing the 3 chickens and the goat is unhappy with the dog, and they've got a problem on their hand. They've got an expensive dog, they've got lots of feeding, things like that. It's not a solution for everyone, and it's those people that really have livestock and really need protection from predators. They generally also the people that will put a bit more work and time in because they see it as an investment in their livestock operation. So that is, in short, like as I said, every slide of mine could be a full day presentation. I could go into a lot of detail about a lot of the issues. But if you have some questions, I don't know if Bill can hear them and relay them to me, and we can look at see if I can give some solutions or some ideas to that.
Well, you might be able to hear everybody, but does anybody have any questions for concerns about adolescent behaviors or corrections? Or go ahead, man.
Are you not neuter the males, or do you? Does that drastically affect behavior? And if you do, when do you do it? Is that an adolescent thing?
Were you able to hear a question about neutering the males at what age and if it affects behavior?
Yeah. Neutering, honestly, my opinion, if you want the best livestock guardian dogs, you can probably run 2 neutered brothers together, and that would probably be your dream team. Neutering does affect some behavior. They generally tend to be a little less aggressive. It's like gelding a stud horse, right? It tends to calm those hormones down a little bit. I think a lot depends on your area. Like we run intact males, intact females. The problem with running intact females during the females' heat cycles, it does attract wolves to the area, especially lone disperser young wolves trying to find new territory. So that in itself is a problem. Having intact males means that they will claim that area, that territory, and they'll keep the wolves out of that for that reason. I generally like a neutered male, not because they're less aggressive, just because it's easier to manage the dog. They're not breeding the border collie. They're not getting into trouble. That neutered males can work very, very effectively. The age of doing it is the veterinary association say, 2 years and older, so you don't get problems with growth. But I think it really depends on your farm. If you think you're going to have trouble managing that dog, maybe going looking for females, breeding other breeds of dogs, things like that, then maybe 9 months to 12 months is a good age to neuter. I think that's a discussion for like what fits your ranch best. And I personally, I do run neutered males as well. And I quite honestly neuter them around 9-10 months old. Then I don't have problems there. They make wonderful teams that can work all year round, where my females often have to be removed, separated, things like that. So I think that is an absolutely good way to go.
Any other questions, folks? Well, I think that's it, Louise. Hey, I really appreciate you taking some time out to present for us today. Uh, and look forward to doing that interview with you sometime soon.
Well, thank you very much. I just put on the screen some of my information. Everyone who's attending there is welcome to either email me or find me on Facebook or whatever, because I help a lot of people. I've been doing this for a long time. And, if you have an issue, a specific problem, even if you think of it later, you're absolutely welcome to contact me. I put on my blog there. I write a lot of articles, and in those articles, I usually take like one concept and explain it a little bit more in detail. Or specific problems in more detail. So, you're welcome to take a look there and, see some of the articles that I've written. I'm not a great author. My grammar is terrible, but I like to put that information out there so that people can utilize it if needed. So thank you, Bill. And I'm sorry I couldn't make it, but yeah, we're in a critical wildfire situation here. I will be coming down to Texas sometime fairly soon. So maybe we can meet up and maybe meet with some producers as well and make a good day of it.
Sounds really good, Louise. Thank you so much for helping out today and giving a presentation. You have a good day and stay safe up there with those fires.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.